So this is Chernobyl happening in the United States right now. Those are the words being shared all across social media and around the world about a train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio, not far from where I used to live in Ohio. These are the words being said in China on social media in China and on Chinese television. But over the past 48 hours, if you turned on television in China or read social media in China, you would have seen amazing images of the Ohio train derailment that involved 50 trains. 10 of these train cars were carrying highly toxic chemicals known as vinyl chloride, among other chemicals we'll get to. These cars were burning for days, shooting highly toxic chemicals into the air, creating a dark plume of smoke that could be seen from outer space, by the way. Yeah, it was seen from outer space. And so this coverage could be readily accessed in China. And they're rightly saying or calling this America's Chernobyl event, where a town could permanently be devastated, people never coming back home again. This part of Ohio could be ruined for years, waterways ruined. We won't know the full extent of it yet, and we might not for years, by the way. And in fact, the word Chernobyl trending on Twitter this afternoon. Here it is. Hundreds of thousands of tweets all about Chernobyl. But turn on your television in the United States, and the coverage was and has been total silence on this story. The Ohio train derailment on the major media networks. Total blackout. Instead, focus on fake UFO invasion, all in an effort to draw us into a war with Russia and China. Now, just watch last night's. I'm going to show you the full introduction of the NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt. This is the Monday edition. Okay? This is 9 days after this has happened. Everyone's talking about it on social media. We all know it's happened, but the mainstream media is ignoring the story. This is the top of their show where they lay out the whole 30-minute broadcast and see if you notice what's missing. Watch.
Tonight, the growing mystery and the race to recover those unidentified objects shot down by U.S. fighter jets. Defense Secretary Austin saying today they were a threat to civilian aircraft. 3 objects shot down over North American airspace in the last 3 days. But the questions, what are they and who may have sent them? And the unreal moment at today's briefing as the White House seeks to put to rest questions about extraterrestrial activity. Also tonight, the violent U-Haul rampage in New York City, striking pedestrians. 8 injured, some critically. What we're learning about the driver now in custody. The double storm threat packing snow and powerful winds, we're tracking it. The new miracle rescues, even as the death toll soars to 35,000 in the earthquake that hit Turkey and Syria. The 13-year-old boy pulled from the rubble today, more than 180 hours after disaster struck. The warning from NATO, a new Russian offensive long in planning, is now underway in Ukraine. Our Richard Engel in a city under siege. A terrifying plane plunge. Why did a United Airlines flight nearly nosedive into the Pacific Ocean? And the celebration in Kansas City after the Chiefs' thrilling Super Bowl win.
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
All right.
So anything missing? At least we got the storms that are happening, and the Chiefs. We got the Kansas City Chiefs story.
You know what's crazy about that?
No mention.
Last night I started watching Newsroom again, and there's the part where they're talking about like this major story. It's like it's only yellow, and he's like they don't want to report the story of the. I can't remember exactly what the story is, but it's like they probably know this story. They know what's going on, but they chose to. They chose to ignore it.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's not like they're idiots. You've got a room full of 100 people that work on that show. It's their highest rated news broadcast. They know what's going on. They have affiliates in Ohio, in Cleveland,
Sure,
nearby, in Pittsburgh, where this is nearby. They know what's going on. They're choosing to ignore it. Why ignore the story? We'll come back to that in a moment. So what the hell is going on in Ohio?
Well, maybe because it started to sort of stink of conspiracy on the internet, and then I feel like news producers now, if they see anything that stinks of conspiracy, they just throw it away. They won't instead unpack it and say, well, is there something there? I mean, I've been guilty of that in the past too. Things I didn't want to look at because they felt like...
Everyone watching right now has done that. We're like, I don't want to look into that. You know what? I've got enough going on.
But
I just don't.
That's not an excuse for national news producers. When you see the images of this is not a story that you can explain why you ignored it. So let's just go through the timeline of what happened and what justification there is for why it happened. The derailment happened on February 3rd in East Palestine, Ohio. There was actually 20 cars full of chemicals. Here is the crash site. So this is just the crash before the burn. Video from a warehouse along the track shows that it was on fire for at least 20 miles. So this is a warehouse, and their security footage caught this image of a train going by, and you'll see
this video obtained by our news partners at
go ahead and play the audio.
By a security camera at an equipment manufacturing plant in Salem, Ohio, some 20 miles from East Palestine. You can see what appear to be sparks or flames under one of the cars as it passes the plant.
So that looks bad. That means that it was flaming for at least 20 miles, because this footage is 20 miles from the crash site. So as it was going along, you'd hope somebody sort of caught that, but nobody did. The derailment, though, is not what caused the explosion. The rail company called Norfolk Southern is what caused the explosion. They told residents the weekend after the crash that they would be blowing up the site in what they called a controlled breach. Here is their website with updates just a few days after the crash. The one on the bottom was the first update, and then the update you see on the top. They said, we put together a plan to manually vent the cars. What they mean by vent the cars is blow them up, like get air inside of them. It said this will be done in a controlled fashion. To protect the environment, we have prepared pits and embankments to drain the material into which will then be remediated. When it is safe to do so, the manual release of pressure will be via a controlled breach of several rail cars and under the supervision of experts and first responders. This will be loud and visible, they said. They should have maybe put an exclamation point. I'm sorry it's so light that the text is not darker. Some of the material, they say, will burn off as it drains for a short number of hours. And we have been and will continue monitoring air quality with the Ohio EPA. Afterwards, cleanup work on the site can safely continue. And then there's this update where they say, okay, we did it. Rail cars have been successfully under the supervision of experts and first responders. Some of the material is now burning off consistent with expectation from earlier models. And it's expected to drain for a short while. So, which is interesting. So what they're saying here about the scientific models is they drew up some estimates of what it would look like to burn these, to blow them up. And they figured, okay, it's going to be this bad. Let's do it. And the way that they word it here makes me think, the way they say some of the material is now burning consistent with the models, meaning, whoa, it was a heck of a bigger explosion than we had anticipated, but now it's the size the models predicted.
Just look at that photo. I mean, that's unbelievable. Can you imagine your kids in school, down the road from that?
No.
Nothing to see here. No problem here at all. And I love that in their press release, there's basically saying, oh, you'll be able to see it. You'll probably be able to see it. What they should have put in there is you'll be able to see it from the moon.
Yeah, loud and visible is what they say.
When I photo on Twitter, I actually thought, because I was like, okay, there's this thing going on. I thought that cloud was photoshopped in.
It does
until I
look
actually
like
saw
that.
the photo, because it looked like it was not part of that photo. I was like, holy cow, that is real.
Yeah, it looks fake. I mean, it literally looks like a mushroom cloud, like someone just dropped a bomb, or like some television show like Jericho or something like that. In fact, there was a television show on Netflix called White Noise that was set in East Palestine. And isn't that amazing?
Yes, I'm going to tell you about it.
Okay, well, we'll get to that in a little bit later then, because a short time ago, I spoke to Nick Sortor, who just arrived in East Palestine, Ohio, to report on what was happening there. Let's listen to what I talked about with Nick. Watch. Well, joining us now from East Palestine, Ohio, is Nick Sortor. He's a U.S. political strategist who just got to East Palestine just a few hours ago and has been touring the crash site and speaking to the people there locally. Nick, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Clayton.
So you're literally right where the crash happened. Can you tell us what you're seeing? And we'll talk about what the people are saying in the town as well.
Sure. So right behind me here, you can actually see a lot of the remnants of the explosion that happened here 10 days ago. There is still a lot of work in progress. You've got Norfolk Southern has a huge recovery operation here. Mainly, it seems, according to the people, because they just want their tracks reopened. And, that makes a lot of sense. What we're not seeing is a large response from the federal government. I have not seen anybody with the EPA or any other of the alphabet soup agencies here on the ground. Right over here is, where you'll see that there's an actual intersection, and it actually happened right there. That is where the train car exploded.
And it doesn't appear to be like a lot of action there. Have they've been trying to keep you away from that site?
To an extent. So I was actually able to cross over there before. I was actually able to drive through, and then they put them on it. I guess they didn't like me doing that. But I was able to do that before, and I was actually able to talk to some of the property owners around there and get their sentiments on what was going on. In particular, the property that is closest to where the explosion happened. I was able to have about a 30-minute conversation with her, and she was able to...
What did she say?
She basically expressed the fact that the town has just been totally upended here. It's a small town. This is the epitome of small town America right here. This is the biggest shakeup they've ever had. Those were her words. People don't know what to do. They don't know how to handle it. They feel like they've just been abandoned here by the federal government, and they feel like they're about to get screwed because they don't trust their water sources anymore. They don't trust their own gardens anymore. One of the ladies I talked to said that she wasn't ever going to plant anything in her garden ever again, and felt like she needed to move her kids and her grandkids out of the town. And they're seriously worried that this town is going to die for this reason.
Of course, and the reason one of the reasons you probably went there is because this has been silent. There's been no coverage of this. Watching the mainstream media newscasts last night, no coverage of this, no discussion of this. In fact, the word Chernobyl, America's Chernobyl, has been trending on Twitter over the past 24, 48 hours, that this could be the equivalent of, what happened in Ukraine with nuclear fallout. Is that the sense that you're getting from talking to the people there, that they really feel like they might have to leave this town altogether?
They absolutely do, because the issue that they're most fearful of is what are the long-term health ramifications here? Because as you've seen with so many other, like Monsanto, that lawsuit there, it took years and years and years, and it was really difficult for them to prove, and a lot of people never even got paid out. The lady that I spoke to right over here that owned that property compared it, she said, this is our Camp Lejeune. And that is, it's probably very true. I mean, they think that this is going to be totally covered up. They have not been able to get in contact with anybody since the governor did that press conference here at one time. He did Mike DeWine did his rounds to,
right.
Make it look good, soften the blow or whatever. And then after that, just radio silence from everybody. They're getting no support here at all. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that the media they're not here. They're not here. I'm the only one looking around here by myself. I haven't seen a single camera anywhere.
It's really unbelievable. It's unbelievable. And you described, just from a few hours there, can you describe the air quality? You were talking about it's bringing tears to your eyes. Can you explain what you're smelling, what you're seeing?
As soon as you get into the town, actually, it's probably in about a 5-mile radius. There is a very sweet, chemically smell, right? It almost smells like burning rubber, if you know what burning rubber smells like.
Right.
But it's very overwhelming. It tickles the back of your throat. And yes, my eyes were watering for the first, hour and a half. The thing that I pointed out on Twitter anyway, and a lot of people understand this, is after a while, you kind of get used to a smell.
Right.
And so these people here may not be actually having that sense of smell of this toxicity that's in the air right now. And that's just going to be terribly lethal in the long run.
So have you seen...
They don't even know what they're breathing.
What are the businesses open downtown? You're very close to the downtown there in East Palestine. Again, a small town. Are businesses open? Are people actively commuting to and from work? Does it look like it's still business as usual or not?
No, there's very light traffic around here in general. There are a lot of people that have not come back yet. The evacuation orders were lifted, I believe earlier, or it was within the past week. And there are myriads of people, according to people that I have talked to, where, their friends won't come back. They're scared. They're scared, and they're getting no reinsurance from anybody. And so, yes, there are a lot of businesses downtown that are closed. And, it's sort of like, it's almost eerie. It's almost eerie. The majority of people in this town are here at this disaster site.
Nick, thank you so much for joining us. I know taking some time out as you're making your way around the town. Thank you for taking a few minutes to speak with us. We really appreciate it. I mean, please be safe. I mean, this is, of course, a major concern about the air quality, and I know the water quality is another big issue there with some of these chemicals. There's word, of course, that some of these chemicals could bind to water particles and basically stay in the water table for years to come. What are they saying before we let you go? Are they saying anything about the drinking water there before we let you go?
Yes, that's a great question. The lady that owns this property back here, it's straight across actually. It's like I said, the closest property to where the explosion was. She mentioned that there's a drainage ditch that runs alongside the railroad tracks that goes straight into a creek. And that creek ended up being the one that I don't know if you saw it on the news, where there were a bunch of fish that had gone belly up and such, and it's still happening. There's still plenty of fish that are belly up over there, but it leads down into a larger stream that runs through 3 other towns before it gets to the Ohio River, and none of those people trust their drinking water at this point. They won't go out to eat. They won't. I mean, and it's worse for people that have well water. They're not going to drink out of their wells because they believe that this has infected their groundwater.
Absolutely, I would be terrified if my well water were near that. And then, of course, also air quality and heading towards Lake Erie as well. A lot of concerns. Nick, I'll let you get back to work. And thank you so much for taking a few minutes to speak with us. That's Nick Sorter there reporting in East Palestine, Ohio. Thanks so much for joining us, Nick.
Thank you, Clayton. Thank you for covering this.
Thanks, Nick. And we hope for your safety there as well. And East Palestine, as I need to say it, drill that into our brain. He did mention Camp Lejeune in North Carolina, and let's take a look. People don't maybe not remember Camp Lejeune if you weren't in North Carolina. The contamination of the drinking water that happened in Camp Lejeune, from the 1950s all the way up into the 1980s. Cancer, miscarriages, everything. There's still wide open lawsuits for what happened to the contaminated drinking water that was allowed to those hazardous substances.
The lawyers are just getting started on this. They are just cracking their knuckles. Now, I want to bring you through a little bit of what the EPA is saying, because the statement that we showed you earlier from Norfolk Southern had sort of made it seem like the EPA is cooperating with us. They know about it. It's okay. We're working hand in hand. The EPA is not going along with that messaging. They sent a letter to the company last Friday telling them expect to be held liable for this for the foreseeable future and clean it up. They say that they have observed the following. Take a look at what they have, just documented on their own. Materials released during the incident observed and detected in samples from Sulphur Run, Leslie Run, Bull Creek, North Fork, Little Beaver Creek, and Ohio River. Materials related to the incident were absorbed entering storm drains.
Oh, good.
Multiple rail cars and tankers were observed derailed, breached, and on fire. Included these following materials: vinyl chloride, ethylene, glycol monobutyl ether. I'm not going to pronounce all of those. You can read them. 5 rail tankers of vinyl chloride were intentionally breached. The vinyl chloride was diverted to an excavated trench and then burned off. They said that in their statement. We're going to sort of coordinate it off, and it's going to be, and then we're clean it up, basically.
Right.
As if they could contain it, like a kitchen spill. Areas of contaminated soil and free liquids were observed and potentially covered and or filled during reconstruction of the rail line during portions of the trench and burn pit that was used for the open burn off of vinyl chloride. So they mention here the Ohio River, and I mentioned earlier that it runs into the Mississippi River. Here's a sort of map of how those rivers can join. So now this is everyone's problem. This can affect thousands of farms, and many livestock farms are already reporting dead animals, such as chickens, roosters, and foxes. And then, of course, we showed you the fish in the river. So the question is, did they have to burn this? Did their models underestimate what would happen? Well, one emergency response and hazard material technician put it this way. He is saying that if they had looked up, his name is Ryan Cunningham on Twitter, so we'll look at his information. So what he did was look up the contents of each car number and provides us with this chart here. Now, if you notice that there's a P there next to vinyl chloride, it says what that P means is that the material may undergo violent polymerization if heated or contaminated, which would cause the container to rupture or explode. And so see how he explains this. He says, if we review the guide, we see the immediate evacuation precautions should be taken. A reverse 911 that calls all citizens to be evacuated. He says he's also concerned that this material may be explosive when mixed with air, meaning it's sitting there volatile. This is a big deal. We can't just leave it alone. He says, as we start to dive deeper into the science of the material vinyl chloride, we find that it's highly volatile and has a boiling point of 7.9 Fahrenheit. So that means that if one of the tanks is damaged, we have a disaster on our hands. It's a ticking bomb sitting on the ground. We are at a risk of catastrophic BLEVE, known as boiling liquid vapor explosion. He says he doesn't know the quantity of the material, but if it exploded, if it was left like that, it could destroy the city. He said, if it was left. And so the decision was.
Well, they already kind of did destroy the city.
Well,
just a quick question. Does that mean that it had to be cooled down the whole time it's been in transport? Because doesn't that, like 7.9, that's low.
Right. Yeah, a lot of questions here. And that's a good question. Maybe, Philip, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, yeah, if its boiling point is 7.9 degrees Fahrenheit, it's definitely a refrigerated tanker. I mean, there's no way around that. Okay. And so they're like, thankfully it's winter, but we cannot let this even get to room temperature. He says he believes that they decided to do a controlled burn of the pressure release values to minimize the potential of this.
Believe. I've seen people in the chat saying it's believe, EE, I guess. Okay.
To Blave. At this point of the response, he says the options were limited. And so this is his conclusion. He says, given this limited facts, I see no option but to allow the material to burn. Of course, this doesn't dissolve the government responsibility to inform the public is there any way to have done this safely? Or is this just like your options are the whole town goes up in flames or the whole town now has disease related to toxic exposure? These are our options.
Josh Ron 99 in the chat says, is this alarmism or is it realism? It's a good question. I mean, is what alarmism? Like, we're showing you what happened and showing you that people living in that town are saying that they don't want to drink the drinking water, and many have left and are not planning on coming back.
Right. I mean, again, this is one person's, he's an expert, but this is his analysis. But given all the liability, you'd think if he's right and they could prove this could explode and take out the town, and that's what our models show, and even do a tiny experiment in the court, you can prove that in a court of law. Look, we had to burn it or it would have blown up the town.
Right.
That should be provable.
So instead we contaminated the town so that it's basically irreparable damage either way.
I'm not saying one.
Well, that's what I'm asking. How is that any different? How is it if they burn it, how does it stop the explosion part of it? Cause the explosion would have been heat, correct?
Yes, but he's saying the models would show an explosion out and wide, right? And it would literally kill everybody. Well, the material getting to room temperature.
Right.
And so, I mean, if you live in this town, what's your preference? to get blown up without any notice, or to evacuate and then have a choice of whether or not to come back. Of course, the second one is what we would mostly choose, but these are awful options.
Yeah, and I'm just struck by something that Nick said earlier in our interview, is that now they're saying, like, that's fine, like you can start drinking your drinking water again. Really?
They clearly don't know that.
And there's fish going belly up. I mean, how are they telling you that your drinking water is fine? Like, that's unbelievable.
Right. And so, okay, but let's discuss these as if they are real possibilities, right? If you think you have a ticking time bomb in your crash, of course they evacuated the whole town. They did take it seriously. Like, get out of here right now. These are toxic things.
Yeah, but there is a lot of questions. Again, why is the federal government, why is there no mention of it? Why is, the White House not talking about it? Pete Buttigieg was totally ignored it yesterday when he did a public appearance, and he was talking, he said, transportation in the United States is fantastic. It's fantastic. Really? We've had how many derailments in the past 48 hours in Houston, in South Carolina, in Ohio, and a massive chemical in Ohio.
Wasn't there a journalist even arrested trying to cover it? I saw a story on that.
We are going to get to that. Yeah.
Okay.
We're going to get to that.
Now, of course, Clayton mentioned, in a twist of irony, this area of Ohio was the setting for a movie called White Noise that came out over Christmas with Adam Driver. And it is about this very thing, a train explosion, and a town being evacuated. I actually watched this movie over Christmas, but I fell asleep, so I didn't get to the explosion part.
Yeah, and apparently there was extras. There were people hired from East Palestine who were in the movie. It was not filmed in East Palestine, but there's a lot of, feels eerily similar to this. And then speaking of this reporter, there were reports, of course, of journalists being arrested. And on this story, that is true. Even Evan Lambert for News Nation was standing in the auditorium where Governor DeWine was going to speak when he was arrested for covering this story, to broadcast the story. And for no explanation, he was not allowed to cover it. He was told to pack up his cameras, get out of here, watch this. And he was there with his camera set up doing a live shot for the news. And then this happened. Watch.
Just stunning video. Our News Nation correspondent Evan Lambert being arrested in Ohio while reporting at a news conference.
Yes, he was there when he was asked to stop reporting during the time where the governor was speaking. Then law enforcement came up to him. You can see him speaking to them. It looks like the situation was becoming more tense. And then he was taken outside of the gymnasium where that news conference was being held and taken to jail.
So that's how we treat journalists in the United States these days. So we're going to continue to watch this story. Again, it's amazing to see like independent journalists who are covering the story. Mainstream media is ignoring it. Some of the local news stations, of course, covering it, and international stations are coming in and covering it. So you have like literally it's being covered in China, and Al Jazeera is covering it. But you can't turn on your NBC Nightly News and find out any information about this, because this would definitely paint the Biden administration in a poor light. To have 4 train derailments in the past week with an entire town being evacuated.
Well, already there are 4 class action lawsuits in the works against this rail company. Rail workers. Now, you remember we talked about the rail strike in December.
Yeah.
We talked about this sort of shift timing, the way they give people shifts based on how many cars they can put together. This was a 150 car train.
Yeah.
And train workers are saying, we told you about this. We told you this was dangerous. So that is one element of it.
Yeah, we can't check the tracks. We can't analyze the tracks like we used to. So we can't check them for shunts.
This is
or
literally
other problems.
something they were striking about.
Right.
And you might recall that the Biden administration passed legislation to remove their ability to strike.
Right.
So their ability to strike and fix this was removed in corporate interest by the Biden administration and Congress that signed this into law. They should absolutely answer for that. Like, hey, we might have had an opportunity. A rail strike would have been better than this. Like, so what? We had a few less, material in the world. Like, we might have fixed the strike in a matter of 2 weeks.
Right.
If there was maybe a slow up of goods rather than like people die of, cancer related to toxic exposure.
I was reading somewhere also that there's a lot of things the railroad uses that are still from like the 1800s. Like there's stuff needs to be updated.
Yeah, I'm glad. By the way, I'm glad we can spend $1 trillion a year on our military budget to attack other countries. But the United States of America is crumbling, and we can send $150 billion to Ukraine so that they can fix their railroads. But we can't fix our own railroads in the United States. Go ahead, Philip.
I mean, we're the people in the West. The railroad is progress until it reaches a certain point, then it stops.
That's right.
Sorry, Philip. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, it's okay. Well, I think that's why you get that there's no coverage of this is because when you really start looking into what happened, it goes back through Biden, like stopping their ability to strike. It goes to like the Trump era, like removing restrictions on brakes, like the lobbyists didn't want to have to classify hazardous materials going through these towns, and it just keeps going back and back and back. There are so many like dirty hands in this scenario that of course the media doesn't want to cover it because there's not even a side you could pick to say, look, our side didn't have anything to do with it. Like This is like a government screw up on down the line that goes back decades.
Yes.
And that's why you're not going to hear anything on it.
Great point.
Yeah. Speaking of, James Richard gives us a super chat and says, why would these chemicals even be on a train in the first place? That speaks to what you just said, Philip, is that the lobbyists didn't want to classify or register these chemicals going through civilian towns. Because clearly
it was a law at one point.
Was it?
It was a law at one point that they had to declare these hazardous materials, and then they lobbied Congress to get that removed, so that this train going through that town was carrying these highly toxic chemicals, and nobody knew about it. It wasn't classified as that.
And when BlackRock owns these trains, at the heart of all of this, which owns everything, then you can start to maybe the conspiracy wheels start turning on this. Thank you so much for watching this segment here at Redacted. We are live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern time, trying to share the stories that the mainstream media will not cover. You should also come over and join our community of Redacted Rebels over at redacted.inc. That's our private locals community where we can share exclusive content that we simply cannot share here on YouTube. Come over and join the rebellion together right now by going to redacted.inc. We'll see you next time.